The Shatter Belt was a name coined by poets and prospectors, a graveyard of cosmic collisions where the solar system's grand design had faltered, leaving behind a sprawling, chaotic field of rock and ice. It was here, in this forgotten fringe of human space, that the Breaker fleet earned its meager keep. The fleet was less a military unit and more a collection of rusted relics, decommissioned industrial haulers and deep-core miners that the Terran Confederacy had deemed too expensive to scrap. They were handed over to Commander Eris Thorn, a man whose once promising career had been shattered as thoroughly as the asteroids his fleet now hunted. His command was the Geode, an ancient ore carrier whose hull was a patchwork of mismatched plates, its cavernous holds designed for megatons of rock, not for grace or speed. Thorn had accepted his exile with a weary resignation, overseeing a motley crew of grizzled miners, corporate rejects, and ex-convicts who preferred the quiet hum of a life support system to the judgmental stare of civilized society. He ran his fleet by the book, a tattered, regulation-thick volume that was as outdated as his ships, finding a sliver of solace in the rigid order of protocols amidst the chaos of the belt. His greatest source of chaos, however, was not in the celestial mechanics of their hazardous workplace, but in the engine room of his own flagship. Lena Petrova was a brilliant, insubordinate engineer who saw the Breaker fleet not as a junkyard, but as a canvas. She treated Confederacy regulations as mere suggestions, constantly rerouting power conduits, jury-rigging sensor arrays with scavenged parts, and pushing the Geode's ancient reactor core to limits that made Thorn's teeth ache. Their daily interactions were a familiar, grinding friction of his rigid procedure against her reckless innovation. He would cite safety protocols she would counter with diagnostics showing a 12% efficiency gain. He would demand she cease unauthorized modifications. She would present him with a new, miraculously functional system built from scrap that saved them a fortune in fuel costs. It was a stalemate born of necessity. For as much as she frustrated him, Thorn knew Petrova's genius was the only thing keeping the fleet from falling apart entirely. Life in the Shatterbelt was a monotonous cycle of survey, blast, and haul, punctuated by the low-grade terror of a micrometeoroid shower or a life support failure. It was a hard, lonely existence. But it was predictable. That predictability shattered on a Tuesday. The call came from Ceres Station, a deep space research outpost nestled in a stable orbit on the far side of the belt. A place so remote it was more theoretical than real to the Breaker fleet. The signal was a garbled mess of frantic screaming and piercing static, but through the noise, a strange, melodic chiming could be heard, a sound that was unnervingly beautiful and utterly alien. Ceres Station was far outside their designated operational zone, a fact Thorn was quick to point out when he patched the distress call through to Sector Command. The response was as cold and distant as the space between them stand down. Do not engage. A proper military task force has been dispatched. ETA 3 weeks. 3 weeks, Thorn thought, staring at the flickering distress signal. In 3 weeks, there would be nothing left but echoes and a ghost station. Petrova was already at his side, her tablet glowing with data she had no business possessing. "Commander, I'm picking something up near the station's coordinates," she said, her voice low and urgent. She'd been using a long-range sensor array she'd cobbled together from a defunct asteroid scanner and the focusing lens of a mining laser, an illegal modification Thorn had explicitly forbidden. He was about to reprimand her when he saw the image on her screen. The contacts were unlike any known vessel, human or otherwise. They were crystalline, geometric structures that seemed to shimmer and phase, their signatures fading in and out of existence as if they were not entirely in their dimension. They moved with a silent, fluid grace that belied their sharp, angular forms. As they debated the unsettling discovery, a new call came in, this one from within their own fleet. A mining crew working a dense cluster on the belt's outer rim. Call sign Digger 2 reported a bizarre find. While cracking open a particularly large, iron-rich asteroid, they had breached a geode of a different sort, a hollow cavern filled not with crystals, but with a pulsating, bioluminescent network of what looked like fungal mycelium. It clung to the rock in intricate, glowing patterns, emitting a soft, rhythmic light and a low, almost imperceptible hum. Thorn felt a knot tighten in his gut. Strange ships near Ceres Station. A bizarre biological discovery in his own backyard. The coincidence was too great to ignore. He was a man of regulations, a believer in the chain of command. But the screams from the station echoed in his mind. High Command's orders were clear, but they were also a death sentence. Petrova, sensing his hesitation, pressed her advantage. Sir, those people on Ceres have no one else. We're 72 hours away at best speed. The military is weeks out. We have to do something. The bridge crew was silent, the tension thick enough to feel. They were miners and haulers, not soldiers. Their ships were armed with seismic charges and cutting lasers designed to break rocks, not enemy warships. To go to Ceres Station was not just to disobey a direct order. It was suicide. Before Thorn could make a decision, the universe made it for him. A single, crystalline ship materialized a mere 1,000 kilometers off the geode's port bow. It was smaller than the contacts near Ceres. A sleek, razor-edged scout that Petrova's sensor log immediately designated a shard. It hung in the void, impossibly sharp against the star-dusted black, and it did not hail them. There was no communication, no warning shot, only a low-frequency hum that vibrated through the geode's hull. Thorn barked orders, his years of fleet training taking over. Evasive maneuvers, power to shields, someone get a weapon lock on that thing, but the responses from his crew were panicked and confused. The geode was a beast of burden, capable of turning with the agility of a small moon. Its shields were rated for stray debris, not directed energy. Their mining lasers required minutes to charge for a single, imprecise shot. The hum from the shard intensified, and across the fleet, warning lights began to flash. The pilot of the Pebble, a small, agile mining tug, screamed over the comms that his ship was shaking itself apart. Thorn watched on the main view screen as microfractures, like a spider web of lightning, spread across the tug's hull. It was being disintegrated from the inside out. There was no beam, no projectile, just a sound that was unmaking them. The shard then turned its attention to the geode. The low-frequency vibration became a piercing shriek that resonated deep within the ship's metal bones. The bridge's reinforced plasteel view screen began to crack, the fractures spreading in time with the alien chiming. Thorn gripped his command chair, bracing for the inevitable implosion, a profound sense of failure washing over him. This was it. This was the ignominious end to his career, to his life, to his crew. In the engine room, surrounded by the scream of tortured metal, Petrova worked with a desperate fury. The Digger 2 crew had us, against her frantic warnings, brought a small yet contained sample of the glowing mycelium aboard for study. It sat in her lab dish, pulsating softly in its containment field. She had been analyzing its structure, realizing with a growing sense of awe that it wasn't just biological, it was electrochemical, a living superconductor. As the ship's death rattle echoed around her, an idea insane, reckless, and utterly without precedent took hold. She couldn't stop the resonance attack, but maybe she could change what it was resonating with. Screaming at her team to stand back, She bypassed every safety protocol, physically yanking thick power cables from their sockets and rerouting them. With a massive, insulated wrench, she shattered the containment field around the mycelium sample and jammed the live, sparking ends of the geode's main power conduit directly into the strange, alien life form. The effect was instantaneous and apocalyptic. The mycelium conduit, as she had begun to call it, did not just absorb the energy, it devoured it. A blinding flash of blue-white light erupted from her lab, and then the entire ship screamed as the alien network, freed from its containment, surged through the geode's power grid. It was not a transfer of energy, it was an infection. Lights flickered and exploded. Systems designed for steady, regulated power flows were overwhelmed by a torrent of raw, living energy. On the bridge, Thorn was thrown from his seat as the geode bucked like a living creature. The agonizing shriek of vibrating metal was replaced by a deep, guttural, organic roar that seemed to emanate from the very soul of the ship. He scrambled back to his feet, staring in disbelief at the view screen. The cracks that had been splintering across it were sealing themselves, filled in by a strange, fibrous, metallic substance that pulsed with a faint inner light. The entire ship groaned, its old, patched-together frame shifting and reforming as the mycelium conduit integrated with its structure. The shard's resonance attack, which had been seconds from tearing them apart, suddenly dissipated, its frequency unable to lock onto the constantly changing, semi-organic nature of the geode's new hull. The ship's ancient engines, now glowing with an eerie blue energy, fired with impossible force, lurching the massive ore hauler forward with the speed of a patrol cruiser. For the first time, the alien shard faltered. It ceased its attack, its crystalline form seeming to shimmer with uncertainty. It had encountered something that defied its understanding of physics, an organic chaos that had not only resisted its weapon of perfect order, but had adapted to it, had grown stronger from it. Aboard the transform bridge of the geode, Commander Eris Thorn, Engineer Lena Petrova, and the terrified, astonished crew could only stare in silence at the impossible thing their ship had become, floating in the sudden, quiet stillness of space. The silence on the bridge was a living thing, a heavy blanket of disbelief woven with the faint, rhythmic pulse that now thrummed through the geode's very frame. Commander Eris Thorn pushed himself to his feet, his mind a whirlwind of broken regulations and shattered physics. The shard, the crystalline harbinger of their destruction, was gone, having vanished in a flicker of non-space. Retreating from the monstrous thing his ship had become. His crew stared at him, their faces a mixture of terror and awe, seeking an order, a protocol, anything to anchor them in this new, impossible reality. He took a breath, the air tasting faintly of ozone and something else, something loamy and alive, like the smell of a forest after a storm. "Report," he commanded, his voice a low rasp that barely sounded like his own. The helmsman, a young spacer named Calloway, stared at his console, his knuckles white. "Sir, I don't know what to report. The helm isn't responding to manual input, but it's holding a stable position. It seems to be waiting." Thorn's gaze snapped to Lena Petrova, who was standing beside him, her eyes wide with a terrifying, exhilarating light. "What did you do?" he demanded, the words coming out harsher than he intended. She just shook her head, a slow, dazed motion. I gave it a choice. Commander, I gave the ship away to fight back. I never imagined." Her voice trailed off as she looked down at her hands, as if seeing for the first time the tools that had just rewritten the laws of nature. Thorn knew he needed to see it for himself, to confront the source of this chaotic miracle. Petrova, with me. Calloway, you have the bridge. Hail the rest of the fleet. Get a damage report. Find out what happened to the pebble. His boots echoed a strange, muffled rhythm on the deck plates, which now felt less like solid metal and more like hardened cartilage, a detail that did little to soothe his frayed nerves as he led the way to the engine room. The journey through the ship was a descent into a waking dream. The sterile, gray metallic corridors he had walked 1,000 times were now laced with veins of the same fibrous, glowing material that had sealed the bridge view screen. It pulsed with a soft blue light, its rhythm matching the deep thrum that had become the geode's new heartbeat. Wires and conduits were no longer just housed within the walls. They were entwined with glowing tendrils, the boundary between machine and organism blurring with every step. The engine room was unrecognizable. It was no longer a place of machinery, but a sanctum, a living heart. The massive cylindrical reactor core was at the center of a dense, cathedral-like latticework of mycelium growth. The sample Petrova had used had not just integrated with the power grid, it had consumed and repurposed it, transforming the aging fission reactor into a hybrid biogenerator. The air was warm and humid, thick with the scent of electricity and rich earth. Petrova stepped forward, her hand hovering over a pulsating wall of the new growth. "It's incredible," she whispered, her scientific curiosity overwhelming her fear. "It's not just conducting power, it's processing it. It's learning." When the shard attacked, its resonance frequency was a structured, predictable wave. The mycelium network, it's inherently chaotic. It absorbed the energy, broke down the pattern, and then it harmonized with it on its own terms. It didn't just block the attack, it learned from it. Thorn ran a hand over his face, the stubble rasping against his palm. "Learn from it, Petrova. This is a ship, not a student. Can you control it? Can you shut it down?" Petrova finally looked away from her creation, her expression sobering. "That's the thing, Commander. There's nothing to shut down. The original power grid is gone, integrated into this neural network. I didn't just hotwire the ship. I gave it a central nervous system. I don't think I can control it any more than I can control my own heartbeat. I think we have to ask it." Before Thorn could process the terrifying absurdity of that statement, Calloway's voice crackled over the internal comms. "Commander, you need to see this." They rushed back to the bridge to find the main view screen displaying a tactical map of the immediate area. But it wasn't the standard, sterile grid of their old system. This was a fluid, three-dimensional representation of space, with the geode at its center, depicted as a pulsing, organic shape. Tendrils of soft blue light extended from it, representing the ship's sensor range, which had somehow increased by a factor of 10. The rest of the breaker fleet was scattered around them, their icons flickering with damage reports. The Pebble's icon was dark, lost with all hands. A cold stone of guilt settled in Thorn's stomach. But it was the information about their own ship that was most stunning. The display showed their mining lasers, the clumsy, slow-charging tools of their trade, being actively repurposed. Deep within the ship, the mycelium network was extruding crystalline focusing lenses, reinforcing the barrels with fibrous alloys, and tapping directly into the new reactor core. The system was designing a weapon, evolving a defense mechanism in response to the memory of the attack. They weren't just a ship with a strange infection anymore. They were an organism growing teeth. It was then that Thorn made his choice. Sector Command's orders were irrelevant. and the military's 3-week ETA was a funeral dirge. They were here, now, in a ship that had become the single most advanced and terrifying piece of technology in human space. To stand down would be to waste the lives that had already been lost. To stand down would be to let Ceres Station die. Calloway, Thorne said, his voice ringing with a newfound, albeit shaky, authority. Set a course for Ceres Station. The young helmsman looked back, his eyes wide. Sir, the helm. I told you. It doesn't respond. Petrova stepped forward, placing a hand on the strange, new console that had grown out of the old navigation station. It was smooth and warm, like polished bone. Maybe you're using the wrong words, she murmured. She closed her eyes, concentrating. Show us the way to Ceres Station. We need to help them. In response, the three-dimensional star map on the view screen shifted, a shimmering blue line extending from their position across the Shatterbelt to the distant research outpost. The ship's deep hum changed in pitch, and a powerful, silent wave of acceleration pressed them all back into their seats. There was no roar of engines, no violent shudder of a jump drive, just a smooth, impossible surge of speed. The geode, the living ship, was on its way. Their journey through the Shatterbelt was a tense and surreal education. The ship seemed to anticipate every danger, its semi-organic hull subtly shifting its density to absorb micrometeoroid impacts, its new drive system weaving through the dense asteroid fields with an intuitive grace Calloway could only watch in awe. Petrova spent every waking moment interfacing with the new systems, learning that the ship communicated not through code, but through impulses, patterns of light and energy that she slowly began to decipher. She was its interpreter, the high priestess of their new, unknowable god, Thorne. Meanwhile, traded to maintain a semblance of military order, drilling the crew in damage control and combat readiness, even as he knew their old rulebooks were meaningless. They were no longer sailors on a vessel, they were the crew of a Leviathan, and they could only hope it saw them as part of itself and not as a parasite. They were halfway to Ceres when it happened. 2 more shards blinked into existence, flanking them. These were not scouts. They were larger, their crystalline structures more complex, radiating a palpable sense of menace. The fleet that had been sent to investigate the disappearance of the first scout. Thorne's blood ran cold. He had hoped to arrive at Ceres undetected, but their strange new drive had likely been a beacon in the void. Battle stations, he roared, the order feeling both necessary and futile. The crew scrambled, but it was the ship that reacted first. The repurposed mining lasers, now sleek and alien-looking, swiveled to face the new threats. Before the shards could initiate their resonance attack, the geode fired. It wasn't a laser beam. It was a lance of pure, coherent chaos. Petrova, her eyes glued to a diagnostic screen, gasped. It's weaponized the mycelium. It's firing a stream of rapidly evolving biological data that's destabilizing their ship's frequency on a quantum level. On the view screen, one of the shards convulsed. Its perfect geometric form began to warp and distort as the geode's chaotic energy beam struck it. It was like watching a crystal statue melt and twist. The shard's own resonance weapon flared erratically, striking its twin. The second shard, caught completely by surprise, fractured into 1,000 glittering pieces. The first, its internal structure irreparably corrupted, simply dissolved into a cloud of shimmering dust. The entire battle had lasted less than 10 seconds. On the bridge of the geode, no one cheered. They stared at the empty space where 2 enemy warships had been, a profound and terrifying understanding dawning on them all. They had not come to Ceres Station to offer aid. They had not come to fight a battle. They had brought the battle with them, and the monster they were riding was just getting started. The aftermath of the 10-second battle left a silence on the bridge deeper than the void outside. It was one thing to survive an attack through a desperate, accidental miracle. It was another entirely to watch their repurposed ore hauler effortlessly unmake 2 enemy warships. The crew of the Geode were no longer just survivors, they were predators, and the realization sat cold and heavy in the pits of their stomachs. Commander Thorne's mind, once a fortress of regulations and procedures, was now a landscape of terrifying possibilities. The rulebook was gone, burned to ash by the chaotic energy coursing through his ship. He was in command of a weapon that was not only beyond his comprehension, but was actively evolving, growing more lethal with every passing moment. He had set a course for Ceres Station to save lives, but now he was forced to wonder if they were bringing salvation or a different kind of apocalypse. His focus was pulled to Petrova, who was hunched over her console, her face illuminated by the soft blue glow of the mycelium interface. Her fingers danced over the smooth, bone-like surface, not typing commands but tracing patterns, as if in a silent conversation. "What are you doing?" Thorne asked, his voice low. "Trying to understand," she replied without looking up. "When it fired, it didn't just use its own energy, it drew on the energy from the first shard's attack, the one we survived. It's not just learning, it's assimilating. It tasted their weapon, and it's already figured out how to use their own frequency against them. It's developing a specific immune response." The biological terms felt disturbingly appropriate. Thorne looked at the tactical display, where the glowing, organic icon of the geode now pulsed with a brighter, more confident light. "Can you talk to it? Can you ask it to slow down?" Petrova finally looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and intellectual fervor. "Commander, that's like asking a tidal wave to slow down. This is a chain reaction." The mycelium network was dormant, contained in that asteroid for who knows how many eons. "We didn't just wake it up. We fed it a starship reactor and a high-frequency energy weapon. It's not just growing, it's feasting." And we're heading towards a buffet. Ceres Station loomed larger on the main view screen, no longer a distant point of light, but a tangible destination. As they drew closer, the ship's enhanced sensors began to paint a grim picture. The station, a large, wheel-like structure designed for long-term habitation and research, was dark and silent. It spun slowly, adrift, a ghost ship on a cosmic ocean. Clustered around it, like sharks around a carcass, were more of the crystalline vessels, a dozen of them, at least, ranging in size from the small scouts they'd encountered to larger, more formidable cruisers whose geometric complexity suggested a far greater purpose. They weren't attacking the station. They were harvesting it. Long, crystalline tendrils extended from the ships, piercing the station's hull. The melodic, chiming sound they had heard on the distress call was now being picked up by their sensors. A constant, pervasive hum that vibrated through the sector. "What are they doing?" Calloway whispered from the helm. Petrova's console flickered, displaying new data. "They're resonating with the station's power core, but not to destroy it. They're draining it. Slowly, methodically. But that's not all." She pointed to another reading. "There are biosignatures all over that station. Thousands of them. The crew. They're alive." A wave of relief, quickly followed by dread, washed over Thorne. The people of Ceres were still alive, but for how long? The crystalline ships, which they had now designated harvesters, seemed to be treating the station like a ripe fruit, slowly sucking it dry. As if sensing their arrival, The Harvester fleet turned its attention toward the geode. There was no immediate attack, just a collective shift, a unified turning of their silent Brits crystalline forms. A wave of energy, far more powerful than what they had experienced before, washed over them. It wasn't the destructive resonance of the shards, it was a probing, inquisitive frequency, a psychic broadcast that filled the bridge with a cacophony of alien thought. It was a sensation of pure, cold mathematics, of geometric perfection and absolute order. The geode shuddered, not from damage, but from revulsion. The organic, chaotic nature of the mycelial network recoiled from the rigid, sterile logic of the Harvester's communication. On the bridge, the crew felt it too, a nauseating wave of mental static, a feeling of being analyzed, dissected, and dismissed as an error, a chaotic anomaly in a perfect equation. It was Petrova who managed to translate the feeling into words. "They don't see us as a threat," she said. Her voice strained as she pressed her hands to her temples. "They see us as a contamination, a biological impurity in the system. They're not trying to fight us. They're trying to sterilize us." The ship itself seemed to agree. The deep thrum within its hull intensified into a low, angry growl. The mycelial network, which had been focused on internal growth and weapon refinement, now turned its full attention outward. The fibrous veins glowing in the walls pulsed with a furious, blood-red light. The geode was no longer just a predator. It was a cornered animal, and it was about to lash out. Before Thorn could even think to give an order, the ship acted. It didn't fire a single focused beam this time. Instead, a wave of pure, chaotic energy erupted from the geode in all directions. A 360-degree blast of organic static. It was the antithesis of the Harvester's ordered communication, a deafening scream of biological rage. The effect on the crystalline fleet was immediate and devastating. Their unified, telepathic network was shattered by the geode's chaotic broadcast. The ships, which had moved with such perfect, synchronized grace, suddenly faltered. Some drifted aimlessly, their crystalline facets flickering as if confused. Others turned on each other, their resonance weapons firing erratically, misinterpreting their own sister ships as the source of the chaotic interference. The perfect, silent symphony of their fleet descended into a mad cacophony. The geode didn't wait. It surged forward, a spear of organic fury aimed at the heart of the disoriented Harvester fleet. Thorn gripped his command chair, a helpless passenger on his own vengeful flagship. He was no longer leading a rescue mission. He was witnessing a massacre. The ship's weapons, now fully evolved, fired with terrifying precision. It didn't just destroy the Harvester ships, it dismantled them. One beam would target the specific frequency holding a ship's crystalline structure together, causing it to crumble into a cloud of inert dust. Another would mimic the energy signature of a ship's power core, tricking it into a feedback loop that caused it to tear itself apart from the inside. And the geode was not just fighting a battle, it was demonstrating a chilling, intuitive understanding of its enemy's biology and technology, and it was exploiting it with ruthless efficiency. They tore through the disorganized fleet, leaving a trail of glittering wreckage in their wake. As they neared Ceres Station, Thorn could see the crystalline tendrils retracting from its hull. The remaining Harvesters, their network shattered and their ranks decimated, were beginning to retreat, landing out of existence one by one. But one of the largest cruisers, a massive, cathedral-like vessel that had been latched onto the station's main reactor, turned to face them. It ignored the smaller, fleeing ships, its attention focused solely on the geode. A new frequency emanated from it, not a broad communication, but a focused, piercing shriek of pure hatred. It was the fleet's commander, and it recognized the geode not as a mere contamination, but as a true existential threat. The air on the bridge grew cold. The ship's jubilant, aggressive energy suddenly sobered, focusing into a cold, hard point of defensive preparation. The mycelial network knew it was facing its opposite, the apex predator of a different, older food chain. The final, decisive battle for Ceres Station was about to begin. A clash between the chaotic, unpredictable force of life and the cold, unyielding perfection of a crystalline god. And the crew of the geode could do nothing but hold on and pray that the monster they were riding was the stronger of the two. The flagship of the Harvester fleet, a vessel Thorne's mind instinctively labeled the Cathedral, was a terrifying spectacle of geometric perfection. It was a mountain of intersecting crystal planes and razor-sharp angles, glowing with a cold, internal light that seemed to absorb the very darkness of space around it. The focused shriek of its hatred intensified, a psychic lance aimed directly at the heart of the geode. This was no longer a probe or a broadcast. It was a targeted weapon, an attempt to shatter the chaotic consciousness of the mycelial network through sheer, overwhelming force of will. On the bridge, the crew cried out, clutching their heads as the alien consciousness hammered at their minds. It was a feeling of being utterly, cosmically wrong, an error in the universal equation that needed to be erased. Calloway collapsed at the helm, his nose bleeding. Even Thorne felt his resolve buckling, his thoughts fragmenting under the psychic assault. It was the ship itself that saved them. The furious, blood-red glow of the mycelial network softened, coalescing into a deep, defiant blue. A wave of warmth and fierce protectiveness washed through the bridge, pushing back against the alien hatred. It was a raw, primal assertion of existence. The ship shielding its crew, its own symbiotic components, from the mental onslaught. The geode had identified its crew not as parasites, but as part of its own being, and it would not let them be harmed. Petrova, gritting her teeth against the lingering psychic echo, stared at her console. It's creating a psychic shield. It's bending its own biological energy field to counter the Harvester's frequency. It's learning to fight in a dimension we don't even have words for. The Cathedral. Its initial mental attack thwarted, shifted its tactics. Its crystalline form began to resonate, not with a destructive frequency, but with a creative one. The space around it warped and folded. From the void itself, smaller shard-class vessels began to materialize, not jumping in from hyperspace, but being constructed, printed into reality from raw energy. The Harvester flagship was a factory, a mobile forge capable of creating its own army. It's not just a warship. Thorne breathed, a sense of profound hopelessness washing over him. It's a god. It creates life from nothing. Petrova's eyes were wide with a manic, terrified brilliance. No, not from nothing. It's converting ambient energy, background radiation, into structured matter. It's an incredible feat of physics, but it has to have a weakness. It requires an immense amount of power. Look, she pointed to the cathedral. As it produced more and more shards, its own internal light began to dim, its crystalline structure losing some of its sharp, perfect definition. It was sacrificing its own integrity to build its fleet. The geode, it seemed, had come to the same conclusion. It did not charge forward. It did not fire its chaotic energy lances. It waited, holding its position, its psychic shield holding firm against the cathedral's focused hatred. while the swarm of newly formed shards descended upon them like a cloud of angry hornets. The battle that followed was unlike any Thorn had ever imagined. The geode became a living fortress. Tendrils of the fibrous, metallic alloy snaked out from its hull, forming a whip-like, kinetic defense, swatting smaller ships from the sky. The repurposed mining lasers fired not just beams of energy, but globules of raw, adaptive mycelium that latched onto the shards' hulls, consuming and converting their crystalline structures into inert, organic sludge. The ship was a whirlwind of controlled chaos, its every action a direct, biological counter to the sterile, predictable tactics of the shards. It was a brawl between a beast and an army of machines. And the beast was winning. But it was a battle of attrition. For every dozen shards the geode destroyed, the cathedral, though visibly weakening, created another dozen. The geode's energy reserves, while immense, were not infinite. Its hull, though capable of regenerating, was taking damage. Small fractures and breaches sizzled with escaping atmosphere before being sealed by the fibrous growth. But each repair cost energy. They were being worn down, drowned in a sea of endlessly replaceable drones. "It can't win this way," Thorn said, his voice grim. "It's going to exhaust itself. It knows." Petrova replied, her gaze locked on the pulsating light of the mycelian interface. "It's not trying to win. It's trying to learn. It's analyzing the energy conversion process, the frequency the cathedral is using to create the shards." Thorn's blood ran cold. What is it planning to do before Petrova could answer? The ship showed him. The geode suddenly ceased all offensive actions. Its defensive tendrils retracted. Its weapons went silent. It hung in the void, a wounded but defiant beast, and allowed the swarm of shards to close in. The psychic shriek from the cathedral intensified, a wave of triumphant hatred as it sensed victory. The shards all fired at once, their resonance weapons converging on the geode in a perfect and focused attack designed to unmake it atom by atom. But instead of being destroyed, the geode's hull shimmered. The mycelian network, which had been fighting a defensive battle, now opened itself completely. It did not block the incoming energy. It absorbed it. The entire ship glowed with a blinding, white-hot intensity as it drank in the combined power of the shard fleet. It was a gamble of insane proportions, an attempt to swallow a lightning storm. For a terrifying second, Thorn was sure the ship would overload, that they would be vaporized in a self-inflicted nova. The lights on the bridge exploded in a shower of sparks, and the entire vessel groaned, the sound of a creature pushed beyond its absolute limits. Then, the light contracted, pulled inward, focusing into a single, impossibly bright point at the ship's forward view screen. The geode had not just absorbed the energy, it had contained it, harnessed it, and now it was taking aim. "Oh my God," Petrova whispered. "It learned the frequency. It's going to reverse the process." The geode fired. It was not a beam of chaos or a glob of organic matter. It was a lance of pure, focused, creative energy. The same frequency the cathedral used to build its fleet, but amplified 1,000 times and weaponized. It was a beam of anti-creation. The lance of energy struck the cathedral not with an explosion, but with a deafening silence. The Harvester flagship did not shatter or burn. It simply ceased to be. The creative frequency that held its structured matter together was instantly and totally nullified. The mountain of crystal, the alien god, and the ancient consciousness within it were deconstructed, their atoms scattered back into the background radiation from which they had been born. One moment it was there, a monument to a cold and perfect order. The next, there was nothing but empty space. With the destruction of the cathedral, the remaining shards instantly went inert. Their guiding consciousness was gone. They were no longer an army, just a collection of lifeless crystal statues drifting aimlessly in the void. On the bridge of the geode, the emergency lights flickered on, casting long, dancing shadows. The ship was wounded, its power reserves almost completely drained. The deep, life-affirming hum had been replaced by a faint, exhausted pulse. It had won an impossible victory, but the cost had been immense. Thorn pushed himself up, his body aching. He looked around at his stunned, terrified crew, at the flickering, damaged bridge, and then at the silent, ghost-like form of Ceres Station, now free of its captors. They had done it. They had survived. They had won. But as the adrenaline began to fade, a new, more terrifying thought began to creep into his mind. The geode had learned to create life from energy, and it had learned to unmake it just as easily. They were no longer just the crew of a warship. They were the keepers of a god, a moody, unpredictable god of chaos and life that had just demonstrated the power to both create and annihilate on a cosmic scale. And as they drifted in the silent aftermath of the battle, Thorn couldn't help but wonder what, in all the universe, it would decide to learn next. The silence that followed the cathedral's unmaking was absolute, a perfect vacuum that seemed to suck the very breath from the lungs of the geode's crew. The psychic scream was gone, replaced by a profound emptiness. On the main view screen, the fleet of inert shards drifted like crystal tombstones in a silent, glittering graveyard. The geode, their savior and captor, hung in the void, its internal light a dim, exhausted pulse. The rhythmic thrum of its lifeblood slowed to a faint, weary beat. Commander Eris Thorn felt the adrenaline drain out of him, leaving behind the bone-deep ache of a man who had stared into the abyss and found it staring back. He pushed himself to his feet, the deck plates beneath him feeling solid once more. The ship's alien anatomy quiescent for the first time since its violent birth. His gaze swept across the bridge, taking in the scene, Calloway stirring at the helm, wiping blood from his lip. Petrova slumped over her console, her breathing ragged but steady, the rest of the bridge crew slowly picking themselves up, their faces pale with shock and a new, terrible kind of reverence. They were alive. Against all odds, they had survived. He drew a steadying breath, the familiar weight of command settling back onto his shoulders like a well-worn coat. "Calloway, status report on the ship," he ordered, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Petrova, get a channel open to Ceres Station. Let's find out who we just saved." Petrova nodded, her fingers moving weakly over the smooth interface. The ship was wounded, its power levels critical, but it was listening. A moment later, the comm crackled to life, not with a crisp, official voice, but with a faint, shaky whisper. This is Ceres Station. Is anyone there? We saw the light." Thorn stepped forward, positioning himself before the comm pickup. "Ceres Station. This is Commander Eris Thorn of the Terran Confederacy vessel Geode. The hostile fleet has been neutralized. We are here to render aid." The relief in the voice from Ceres was palpable, a wave of emotion that transcended the tinny speaker. The station's acting chief, a science officer named Anya Sharma, explained their ordeal. The harvesters had attached themselves to the station, their crystalline tendrils siphoning energy directly from the reactor and, chillingly, from the bioelectric fields of the crew themselves. They had been trapped in a waking coma, their life force slowly being drained to power the alien fleet. The Geodes' chaotic, violent arrival had been their salvation. As they coordinated rescue and repair efforts, a new kind of challenge emerged. How could Thorn explain what had happened? He settled on a dangerous half-truth, reporting that his fleet had utilized a new, experimental form of resonance weaponry to disrupt the enemy fleet. It was a flimsy explanation, but in the face of the impossible, the survivors of Ceres were too relieved to ask the probing questions that would have unraveled his story. The geode, despite its exhaustion, seemed to understand its new role. It extended a long, stable tendril of the fibrous alloy, a makeshift umbilical and docking clamp, to the crippled station. The connection was gentle, a stark contrast to the violence it had so recently unleashed. As it began to transfer a trickle of its own precious energy to stabilize the station's life support, it also began its own healing process. It drifted slowly through the debris field of shards, but it wasn't clearing a path. It was foraging. Small, exploratory tendrils reached out, touching the inert crystal fragments. Where they touched, the crystal would dissolve, not into dust, but into a liquid slurry of energy and matter that was then absorbed into the geode's hull. The ship was eating its enemies, recycling their perfect, ordered structures to mend its own chaotic, living form. It's reinforcing its own biology with their crystal, Petrova said, her voice a hushed whisper of awe. She had been in constant, silent communion with the ship since the battle ended. It's not just healing, it's evolving. It's integrating the concept of order into its own chaotic structure. It's creating a synthesis, something new. As she worked, her expression shifted. She went still, her eyes unfocused, her hand resting on the console as if listening to a voice no one else could hear. "Commander," she said, her voice distant. "It's showing me something, not words, images, concepts." Thorn moved to her side, watching her face. "What is it the harvesters?" she breathed. "It's showing me their perspective. They weren't evil. Not in a way we would understand. They saw the universe as a perfect, mathematical equation. Life, in its messy, unpredictable, chaotic form, was an error, a corruption. They traveled the void, sterilizing, correcting the equation, imposing their silent, crystalline order on the noise of biological existence. They weren't conquering, they were gardening." She paused, swallowing hard. "The mycelium, the ship, it's the universe's response. It's the noise fighting back. It is chaos itself. The principle of unpredictable, adaptive, messy life, given form and consciousness. It's not a weapon. It's an immune system." The revelation settled over Thorn, a concept so vast it was almost paralyzing. They were not the masters of a monster. They were the pilot fish clinging to a leviathan, a fundamental force of nature that had chosen their rusted, forgotten ship as its avatar. Their brief, violent war was not a territorial dispute. It was a battle over the very definition of existence. Their philosophical debate was cut short by the blare of a proximity alert. A crisp icon appeared on the tactical display, a Terran Confederacy heavy cruiser. Sector Command had arrived, a week early, their engines pushed to the limit. A clipped, authoritative voice cut through the comm. "Vessel Geode, this is Captain Valerius of the C.S. Vigilance. By the authority of Sector Command, you are to stand down and prepare to be boarded. Acknowledge." Thorn looked at Petrova, then at the tactical display showing the heavily armed cruiser. He knew what would happen next. They would see the transformed geode. They would hear the fragmented reports from Ceres, and they would see not a savior, but an anomaly to be contained. They would see a weapon to be dissected or a threat to be purged. The Confederacy, in its own way, was as rigid and ordered as the Harvesters. They would never understand, and in their fear, they would destroy this beautiful, terrifying miracle. He had spent his life following orders, finding comfort in the rigid structure of the chain of command. It was all he had left after his career had been shattered. But now, he saw that structure for what it was, a cage. He had been given command of a forgotten ship in a forgotten sector, a place where rules and regulations faded into irrelevance. And in that chaotic freedom, they had become something more. He stood straight, his decision made. "Petrova," he said, his voice calm and clear. "Can you speak to the ship? Can you ask it if it is ready to leave?" She met his gaze, a slow, understanding smile spreading across her face. She closed her eyes, placing her hand on the console. The ship's pulse, which had been slow and weak, began to quicken, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated with anticipation. "It's been waiting for the order," she whispered. Thorn turned to his comm officer. "Open a fleet-wide channel. To the Vigilance as well." He took a breath, the words flowing not from a regulation book, but from his own, newly forged conviction. "Captain Valerius, this is Commander Thorn. I must respectfully refuse your order. The situation here is more complex than your sensors can indicate. We have found something new in the void, a new form of life, and it has chosen us as its protectors." He paused, letting the statement hang in the silence. "The Breaker fleet is hereby dissolved. We are now operating under a new mandate, an independent charter. We will be escorting the survivors of Ceres Station to a secure, undisclosed location. We are not your enemy, but we will not be interfered with. I suggest you maintain your distance." He turned to Calloway. "Take us out, and tell our new friend it can choose the destination." Before the stunned captain of the Vigilance could even reply, the geode's silent, impossible drive engaged. It did not jump or surge. It simply moved, the stars around it flowing like water. As it pulled away, leading the crippled Ceres station like a mother leading its child, the ship performed one last, extraordinary act. The vast debris field of inert shards began to glow. Under the geode's influence, the dead crystal was reformed, not into weapons, but into a swirling, intricate nebula of light and color, a cosmic garden where a graveyard had been. It was a message, a final piece of impossible art left for the Confederacy to puzzle over. On the bridge of the geode, Thorn watched the Vigilance shrink to a distant star. He was a mutineer, a fugitive, a traitor to the command structure he had revered his entire life. He had never felt more free. He looked at his crew, no longer a collection of rejects and misfits, but the first explorers of a new frontier, not of space, but of existence itself. The weakest ship in the fleet was gone, reforged into the most powerful vessel the galaxy had ever seen. And with a living God at its heart and a new, undefined purpose before them, they turned their faces toward the endless, chaotic dark, ready for whatever came next.